Hello and welcome to RVCC Online, the digital campus of Rainier View Christian Church. My name is Mike Parejo and I'm the digital ministry pastor here at RVCC. I'd like to direct your attention to the QR code on your screen, which will take you to the homepage of our digital campus. The link can also be found in the YouTube description. Once you click through, you'll find several great resources, including a guide to taking communion at home and discussion questions for this week's message. You can also access our digital connection card there. Speaking of the connection card, we would really like to know that you're watching today and would appreciate it if you took 30 seconds to fill it out. This is also the way to let us know how we can be praying for you this week. If you are part of our Sunday morning interactive service, the link will also pop up in the chat. If you've never filled out a Rainier View connection card at any of our services before, we would love it if you would do that today so that I can email you a Starbucks e-gift card just to say thanks for being here. We'll be reading from the Bible during today's message. If you don't own a Bible, I encourage you to download the free YouVersion Bible app on your phone or tablet. There are a variety of great Bible reading plans for adults, students, and kids. Finally, if you are watching during our Sunday morning interactive chat service, our chat hosts are available to pray with you anytime during the service. If you click on the Request Prayer button, a private chat box will open up where one of us would be honored to pray for you. We also want to let you know that we have live services every Sunday morning at our RVCC Parkland and RVCC Graham campuses if you would like to join us. We're following current state safety guidelines regarding masks and cleaning procedures to make sure that everyone is able to worship in a safe environment. You can go to rainierview.org/in-person to learn more. Thank you again for being part of RVCC Online, and let's begin our worship service.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Rainier View. My name is Erica, and we are so glad you're joining us today. We're in a series today called Worst Superhero Ever. Let's join Pastor Jeff as we look to address the question, do my actions really affect others?
Hey, welcome to Rainier View. My name is Jeff. I'm part of our teaching team here, and we are so excited to continue in our series, Worst Superhero Ever. If you didn't catch us last week, Pastor Mike kicked off this message and really set the groundwork and helped us understand the context of the story of Samson, who we're going to be looking at together here as we get started. But I want to ask you a question before we jump into this story this morning. Have you ever had a leader who has let you down in some way? Now, I want you to focus not so much on public figures, but I want you to think about in your life a teacher, a boss, a parent, a trusted mentor or friend, a leader that has let you down in some way. Because I think sometimes that can really put us in a place that we don't end up making the kind of difference. We don't take steps to make good happen in the lives of others because we're kind of thrown off track a little bit there. Cynicism can creep in. We can allow bitterness to kind of take a root in our lives. The difference we want to make in our present, we don't end up making because of what's happened in our past. And so how do we continue to grow? How do we do that when sometimes maybe the examples of others don't stack up and don't add up? And in this series, that's what we're doing. We're looking at the life of Samson, and he is a character in the Old Testament, what we'd say the stories of the people of God before the life and the teachings of Jesus. And so we're looking at his life. Now, we indexed as a teaching team the worst leaders of the Bible ever, and we have power rankings, and we got some bad news for Samson. He's probably near the top. Like, I don't know if he's the GOAT, but he is right up there with all of that. And so, I mean, we're kind of kidding. We didn't actually rank them. But here's the thing. Samson is not an amazing leader, and we're not engaging in America's favorite pastime, armchair quarterbacking, right? Criticizing people in seats we've never sat in. That's not what we're doing. That's not why we're looking at his life. We are looking at the life of Samson because we need to know that the choices that we make matter. The choices that you and I make affect the lives of others. usually far, far more than you and I realize at first. And for Samson, he was supposed to be working for the good of others. His role at that time in ancient Israel was to be a judge, not like a guy in a black robe with a weird, powdery wig, but a judge was somebody who freed God's people when they got into trouble, when they were subjugated, when they were conquered by somebody else. That the judge would step in and he would bring the people back to a place of freedom, starting first and foremost with their spiritual commitments, with the committing themselves to the Lord first and foremost, rather than focusing on an external solution to their problems. And so, but Samson doesn't really lead the way he was called to. He focuses almost exclusively, as we've seen so far in the story, on his own desires. He acts impulsively, rashly, he acts out of anger, and this force of God's Spirit in his life, which should have been used not only for the good of God's people, but for the people around them, he doesn't do that. He avoids that almost completely, as we've seen so far in our story. The choices that he makes only bring further hurt and further pain into the lives of other people versus a greater sense of God's freedom and peace for, again, the people of God and for other people. And so here's the thing. What we want you to know right at the outset is that Samson teaches us that even when my life is a mess, even when I make a mess of my life, it is not too late for God to use my life to make a difference. Even when you feel there is no way that you're going to be able to step out and escape the mess that you have maybe created in your life, that you feel you've created in your life, it is not too late for you to make a difference, to make an impact. And so that's what we're going to examine here. After we look at the story of Samson, we're all going to look at one thing that we can begin to do this week to work towards making a greater difference, a greater impact in our lives. But for now, let's go ahead and jump into Judges 15. We're going to pick right up in verse 1 together. And so let's read. Judges 15, verse 1. Later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I'm going to my wife's room," but her father would not let him go in. "I was so sure you hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." Wow, great dad. Samson said to them, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." So he went out and caught 300 foxes, and he tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and the standing grain, together with the vineyards and olive groves. When the Philistines asked who did this, they were told, "Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion." Now, there is a lot going on in Samson's story here and even what we looked at prior that ought to be very disturbing to us. In fact, when I hear people say, "Oh man, I want my kids to learn the Bible stories," I always want to ask, which ones? Because some of them, honestly, like this one, are a little TV-14. Look at really what's happening just in the brief passage that we read so far, right? We have women being viewed merely as objects to be bartered with, to be used sexually. We've got the murder of innocent animals in Samson's bid to take vengeance on his enemies. He engages in property destruction, really economic destruction, by burning up those olive groves and those vineyards. That is years and years and years of growth that literally went up in flames. And just this ongoing escalation of murders that we see. I'm not quite sure this is a cute little bedtime story to read to your 5-year-old. But most disturbing out of all of this is that Samson has a complete lack of heartburn about any of it. He has no compulsion that he should change, that anything should be different here. And this raises an objection that a lot of us wrestle with, or we have people in our lives that wrestle with. There's a lot of violence, in particular, in these Old Testament passages. And how do we reconcile a good God and a loving God being present in the midst of all of this violence that we see? How do we address that? And so we're actually going to create some content for you to download in kind of a podcast form at the end of this series. And as a teaching team, we're just going to have a roundtable discussion and really dive into this issue of how can God be good, how can God be loving, and yet present in the midst of so much violence that we read in these accounts. And so for today, though, we simply ask you to just recognize that as hard as it is for us to imagine what's going on in this story, that we need to realize that this was just simply normal in Philistine culture. Nobody would have lost sleep over this. This was just the way things were. And Samson is living the same way. But here's the thing. God's people have always been called to live differently than the culture around them. Okay? And Samson doesn't do this as a leader of God's people. He just simply doesn't even try. He matches the values of the Philistines and lives accordingly. In fact, he actually adds fuel, like fox fuel, to the fire, and he makes it worse. He ignores how he was called to, again, set an example of how the people of the one true God were called to live differently. Now, I don't want to give the impression that if Samson made different choices, all of the problems would be fixed, right? If he just did a few things differently, it would just be rainbows and sunshine and sprinkles for everyone. No. There is not one leader, no matter how amazing they are, there's even not one group of people, no matter how dedicated they are, to solve every problem, to fix every wrong in the world. That's just simply not something that happens. But I think we use that as an excuse too often. We let ourselves off the hook for the good that we know we should do, the good work that we should be pursuing. We kind of say, somebody else is going to do that. Or, is it really going to make a difference if I pursue this good? But when a leader refuses to lead by example, it just encourages people to live however they want. And this is really a theme throughout the book of Judges. We see this in Judges 17, verse 6. This phrase, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. And so in Samson's time, it was just whatever you want to do, that's fine, you do you. But how does this carry forward into the story? How do things change? Does Samson finally turn it around? Does he begin to lead a different example in the lives of others? Let's jump back in to the passage in chapter 15, picking back up in verse 6. When the Philistines asked, who did this? They were told, Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. And this just gives us a little bit of flavor, a little bit of insight into Philistine culture here. Like, again, this was normal. Somebody threatens you, respond with violence, even murder. You get them back, you get them first. And again, how is Samson called to be a difference in that world, to set a different example, to lead differently? Does he respond? Does he finally turn it around? Let's continue to look in this account. Picking back up in verse 7, Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. He went then down and stayed at a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up and camped at Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The people of Judah asked, why have you come to fight us? We have come to take Samson prisoner, they answered, to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? He answered, I merely did to them what they did to me. So no, Samson chooses to not set a different example, to not make some different decisions that will lead to a different outcome. Instead, he simply inflames the cycle of conflict. He pours more gasoline on it. Rather than break this cycle of conflict that is building here, he continues to feed into it. And so we can just see, even so far in the story, this cycle, how it's played out. The Philistines, they want Samson dead for slaughtering their people. But the only reason he did that was because they killed his father-in-law and his wife-to-be. Now, he didn't really actually care about them. He was just mad that somebody did something to something that was his, and he's kind of throwing an adult temper tantrum about it, like a toddler would, with much more serious consequences. But they had only done that because he burned their crops and burned their fields and destroyed their economy. But, right, he had only done this because, again, his father-in-law had given away his wife to somebody else. But his father-in-law had only done that because Samson decided to rage quit at his wedding and just walk out and disappeared for months, only to return to hook up with his daughter. But Samson only got angry. He only did that because his wife-to-be gave away the answer to his ironclad riddle. It brought embarrassment to him and caused him to lose a bit of a large bet that he had placed on himself. Right? And so we see this cycle building and building and building. And at any juncture, Samson could have made a different choice. He could have done something that would have led to a different outcome, that would have de-escalated. But he doesn't do that. Right? We see the cycle continuing. And this contrasts so much with when we talk about following Jesus, I just want to read one verse and show a little bit of contrast between Samson and between the kind of life and decision-making that Jesus invites us into. Here's what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5. He says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." And so the way of Jesus is greater than the way of Samson. Now, getting ahead of ourselves, we want to stay in Samson's story here this morning. But even so, even though Samson didn't have the way of Jesus in front of him, Samson still should have known, should have lived differently. But his desire was almost exclusively focused on himself. Kill or be killed, might makes right. This was the culture that Samson lived in, and he could have been a poster child for. He again, exemplified this. In a culture that it was morally acceptable to live this way, he took this really and elevated it to an art form in terms of how he carried this out. Obviously, he was not focused on bringing good into the lives of others, even his own people. He doesn't do this. And so he kind of just abdicates that. And his own people, again, come to him and they say, Samson, don't you see that you're making life harder for us? Don't you see you're making life worse for us? And I can imagine Samson, his giant shoulders, he just kind of shrugs like, I mean, what, guys? Like, judge is going to judge. And so certainly this is not where this hero, this rescuer, is going to just stay in this lane. Certainly he's going to turn things around, right? And so let's pick, again, back up in the passage here in Judges 15. His people, they said to him, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." "Agreed," they answered. "We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came towards him shouting, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Again, he wasn't supposed to touch dead animals. Again, not being the judge he was called to. Goes on to say, then Samson said, "With a donkey's jawbone, I've made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I've killed 1,000 men." Again, he's seeking vengeance. He's making it into a silly nursery rhyme, mocking his enemies, not being the judge he was called to be. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramoth Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En-Hakkore, and it is still there in Lehi. And Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So no, Samson chooses not to lead differently. He doesn't choose to lead by example. He doesn't choose to sacrifice himself for the good of others. He actually does none of that. He responds with more deceit, with more murder, with more destruction. He wasn't acting out of this role as a military leader. We see here clearly his actions are really just a vengeance that he's carrying out because of a personal vendetta, and that's what's driving his decision-making. That's what's driving his actions. But what I find fascinating about this account, what is so completely unexpected, is that by providing the water from the rock, God is showing Samson grace even still. Even still, God isn't done with Samson. And this should be such an encouragement to us, because maybe we're feeling like we're in the midst of a mess in our lives right now. Or maybe it's something in our past and we feel like it's disqualifying us from making a difference in our present. We need to know, we need to feel and understand that it is never too late for God to use you and I to make a difference. He hadn't given up on Samson. He hasn't given up on you and I yet. Even though he's been the opposite of what God's called him to be. Even though he's not bringing this freedom that he should have, that he ought to, God's not done with him yet. But so far, we're still left with his choices leaving God's people trapped. He had this chance to bring something good to them, to bring this freedom. But he's just continuing to encourage people to live that Philistine life, while God had something in store for them that was so much greater than that. So next week, we're going to pick back up and we're going to see how God continues to work in a story right now that looks kind of dark to us. But what does this mean for you and I today? What does this mean for us? I think we need to think about our decision-making like an ecosystem where we all make a small contribution to the health of what is going on around us, to the overall condition of things. And it's not that we can create a problem-free society. Okay, so Timon and Pumbaa already told us this story with Simba, right? Like, you can't keep your head in the sand forever. You got to face problems eventually, right? So we know, though, that we can't create a problem-free world, that we can't fix every problem, that we can't reach everybody. But that doesn't mean that our choices don't impact others' lives for good. I think we can lose sight of that so easily. Our choices make a difference in the lives of others, but those choices flow both ways. I believe that you and I, we are either contributing to the good of others or contributing to their difficulties and their hurt and their pain. There are no neutral decisions that we make. They are, again, either encouraging good in the lives of others, or they're bringing hurt, or they're bringing disadvantage. And that might be challenging for us, because we just think, well, it's okay for me to just focus on myself. I'm just looking out for myself. I'm not really bothering anybody. But we're contributing with the decisions that we make. And so I would ask all of us today to ask ourselves the simple question, where am I contributing to the good of others? Martin Luther King Jr., he once said this. He said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And Samson's problem, and sometimes if we're honest, it's true of you and I, is that we just simply don't care about the good of others. It's just not on our radar. And there's a mantra that Samson lived by that honestly, many of us maybe fall into at times today as well. I mentioned it earlier. Hey, you do you, right? Hey, I gotta be me. I gotta live how I'm gonna live, right? Here's the thing. We believe at Rainier View that Jesus didn't come and live his life and did what he did and taught what he taught. He didn't endure the agony and the pain of the cross just for us to live a life that is just you do you. God loves us too much to leave us in the mess that we might create on our own. He wants to transform our lives. He wants to see us make different decisions, that our decision-making would impact the lives of others for good, that we don't just give up and not make a difference, that no matter how much of a mess you feel like your life might be right now, it is not too late for God to make a difference in your life. And so this week, I would just encourage you, begin to look for how you can make a difference. Even if you feel like your life is a mess emotionally or relationally or financially or literally. Like some of you have got toddlers at home, right? And you're like, how did the pizza end up on the ceiling, right? Like whatever messes you've got in your life. I would encourage you to begin this week by praying a simple prayer. Or if you're joining us and you're just you're spiritually curious, you're checking out this God stuff, this faith stuff, you're not sure where you're at, just ask this as a question of God. But wherever you're at, ask this question this week as you begin. God, to whom can I give my time, my presence, my encouragement, or my gifts to this week? Pray that honestly. Ask that question honestly. God, to whom can I give my time, my presence, my encouragement, my gifts to this week? Because when we give up those things without an expectation of receiving anything in return, when we don't make it transactional, we end up living very different lives which contribute to the good of others and make an impact far greater than you will ever know. And this is the life that Jesus invites us to. One more verse, Mark 10:45. I love this description of Jesus and what it means for how we posture ourselves and how we live our lives. Says, for even the Son of Man, Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Samson uses his life to seek revenge and to kill his enemies. Jesus gives his life away freely as a ransom for all of us because of his great love for us, despite of our sin. And so how do you start living out of that kind of life, that self-giving, that self-sacrificing life for the good of others? You begin by asking. And I believe if you ask honestly, God's going to reveal that next step to you because he loves you too much to leave you in that mess that you're feeling maybe this morning. He wants your life to make a difference, to impact others for good. Begin this week by asking how it is you can take that next step. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today and joining us, and we look forward to having you back here next week with us at Rainier View. Have a great week.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today, Jeff. If you'd like to dig a little deeper into today's topic, we've just launched our new podcast. Check that out at rainierview.org/RBCC online. We've got some great things going on, and we want to make sure that you are staying informed about it all. The best ways to do that is through our all-church emails, by following us on Instagram and Facebook, or check in anytime at rainierview.org. We are a church that loves to be generous. If you call Rainier View your church home, you can give by simply texting RVCC to 77977 to use our safe and secure online system. You can also give on our website or send in a check. If you're joining us for the first time today, please don't feel any obligation to give. We are just so glad that you're here. We'll be together for just a few more minutes today. As we sing through this next song, we encourage you to take communion in your homes. This is a time we take every week to think about all that Christ did for us on the cross. If you'd like more info about communion, you can get that at rvcc.online. So gather some bread and juice and take these as reminders of Jesus' body and blood. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope you'll join us again next Sunday right here or at one of our other campuses.
You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from have chosen me. Love has called my name. Oh, I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins, and I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. Sing, oh, you split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears are drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I can stand and sing. I am a child of God. Sing that again. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears are drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. I am a child of God. Oh, I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, 'cause I am a child